We all have unconscious biases that can have a negative impact on our work environment, team relations, and job and career progression prospects. If you like the content in this video, don't forget to show your support. It is important to recognize our own prejudices and take steps to mitigate their influence. However, it is also important to acknowledge that unconscious bias can be beneficial in certain situations, such as when it helps us make decisions quickly or recognize patterns. Therefore, it is essential for us to be aware of our biases and strive to reduce their negative effects while still recognizing their potential advantages. Gender bias affects us all, whether we realize it or not. We may experience it in subtle ways, such as being overlooked for a promotion or not being taken seriously in a professional setting, or in more overt forms, such as being denied access to certain opportunities or subjected to demeaning remarks. It is essential that we recognize when gender bias is present and take decisive steps to rectify it. It is important to note that gender bias is not always intentional, and can be difficult to detect and address. Additionally, it is important to be aware that gender bias is not the only form of discrimination that exists. Other forms of prejudice can also be present. Let us work together to create a more equitable world for everyone. Gender discrimination is an issue that affects us all, whether we are aware of it or not. It can have a detrimental effect on our careers, our pay, and our chances for progression. We must be cognizant of the potential for gender bias and take proactive steps to ensure that it does not impede our success. While gender bias can be a hindrance, it can also be advantageous in certain situations. For instance, if we are in search of a particular type of employee, we may be more likely to hire someone of a certain gender if we feel that individual is more likely to meet the job criteria. Additionally, gender bias can be beneficial in terms of fostering a more diverse work environment, as it can motivate us to recruit a more eclectic selection of personnel. Therefore, it is essential to be aware of the possibility of gender bias and take action to prevent it from obstructing our success. Ageism affects us all, regardless of our age. We have all experienced it in some form, whether it be subtle or overt. We must come together to put an end to this discrimination and create a more inclusive world. Age should not be used to define us. Instead, our merits and abilities should be the sole determinants of judgment. Let us strive to build a society that is free from ageism and that respects all people equally. Together, we can make a difference and create a world where everyone is treated with respect and dignity. We may be tempted to think that someone is intelligent, kind, and trustworthy simply because they are attractive, or that someone is untrustworthy and unreliable because they are rude. However, it is important to remember that these effects are not always reliable and should not be used to form judgments about someone. It is essential to understand the implications of these effects and how they can shape our outlook in order to make informed decisions. Have you ever met someone and immediately formed an opinion of them? The halo effect is when one positive attribute of an individual leads to the assumption that they possess other admirable qualities. Conversely, when one unfavorable characteristic leads to the assumption that they possess other undesirable qualities. While these effects can be dangerous, as they can lead to biased opinions and unjustified conclusions, it is important to be aware of them so that we can be mindful of our own biases and judgments. Have you ever found yourself nodding in agreement with others, even if you did not necessarily agree? We have all experienced this phenomenon, known as confirmation bias, which occurs when we actively seek out information that reinforces our pre-existing beliefs, while disregarding any evidence that may challenge them. We often find ourselves adapting to the opinions of those around us, a phenomenon commonly referred to as conformity bias. It is important to be aware of these biases and ensure that all the facts are taken into account before making a decision, as they can easily lead to erroneous conclusions. However, it is worth noting that confirmation and conformity bias can be beneficial in certain contexts, as they can facilitate swift and effective decision-making. So, it's important to be aware of this phenomenon and to think critically about the information you're presented with. We have all experienced the power of connection that comes from discovering a shared interest with someone. This phenomenon, known as affinity bias, can be a great way to form relationships, but it can also lead to a lack of impartiality and an inability to comprehend the full scope of a situation. It is important to be mindful of this bias and to take a step back to consider if it is influencing our perception of a person. Let us strive for an unbiased outlook and be aware of this prejudice so that we can make the most of our connections. We have all experienced the tendency to be drawn to those who share similar traits with us, known as affinity bias or the similarity bias. However, this can lead to a homogeneous work environment, denying those who are different from us the opportunity to thrive. To ensure that everyone has the chance to succeed, it is essential to be aware of this inclination and work together to create a more comprehensive atmosphere that is welcoming to everyone. Together, we can create an atmosphere that embraces everyone. This concludes part 1 of this series. Don't forget to check out part 2.